happened last fall when I drove up to the Hetch Hetchy trailhead in Yosemite National Park. It was October 14th, 2022, exactly 6:17 in the evening. The light was fading and the air felt wrong, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I thought I was just going for a quick hike to clear my head. But what I walked into that night wasn't the woods anymore. It was something older, something counting me step by step. And once it marked me, once I saw the first triangle cut into the stone, I knew I was already too late. You're listening to ASMR 404 Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So this happened last fall when I drove up to the Hetch Hetchy trailhead in Yosemite on October 14th, 2022, at exactly 6:17 in the evening. I remember the time because I checked the dashboard clock twice when I parked. The sun was already dipping low behind the ridges, and the shadows were stretching long across the granite walls, and the reservoir shimmered with that dark bluish tint that comes right before twilight. It was one of those evenings where the air feels just a little too still, like everything is waiting for something to happen, and I should have taken that as a sign to turn around and head back down the narrow road. But of course I didn't, because I had driven almost 4 hours to get here. And stubbornness is a dangerous trait when you're in the wilderness. I had my pack slung over one shoulder, heavier than it needed to be since I always overpack. I had my little camp stove, too many cans of food, an extra jacket, a headlamp, and even a paperback book. I knew I wouldn't read, but it felt wrong not to bring it. I was supposed to meet up with a buddy the next morning. He was hiking in from another trail on the far side, and we planned to link up near Rancheria Falls. So I figured I'd just hike a couple miles tonight and set up camp close to the water. Nothing ambitious, just enough to stretch my legs and shake off the road. The parking lot was nearly empty, just my beat-up Honda and one dusty SUV with plates from Nevada. I noticed the SUV because it had a crumpled map stuck under the windshield wiper, like someone had tried to leave a note and the paper had gotten rained on. But I didn't think much of it. Just one of those trailhead oddities you get used to. There was no one else around, not even a ranger truck, which was strange for Yosemite even in the shoulder season. Usually you see someone at least, but it felt like the place had been abandoned for the night. Locked up, hoisted the pack, and started down the trail, the gravel crunching under my boots. And almost right away I got that prickling feeling on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just nerves, just the silence playing tricks. But silence doesn't usually feel heavy like that. It was thick, almost physical, and every sound I made felt like it was echoing too far, bouncing off the granite walls and coming back wrong, stretched out like voices in a tunnel. About 10 minutes in, I heard something faint behind me, like a footstep on gravel. So I stopped, waited, let the pack straps creak on my shoulders. Nothing, just that soft sound of wind moving across the reservoir. But then, there it was again. One crunch, like weight shifting onto a stone. I turned around, and of course there was nothing. just the fading light and the empty trail winding back toward the parking lot. I laughed at myself, forced it out loud just to hear some noise, but the laugh died too quick and didn't feel like mine. I kept walking, faster now, telling myself I'd just find a spot by the water, throw down the tent, and everything would feel normal once there was a fire going. And that worked for a little while. The rhythm of moving calmed me. The smell of pine and damp granite felt grounding. But then I started noticing these odd little markers on the side of the trail. Stacked stones, way too neatly balanced, not like casual cairns hikers leave. These were tall, almost chest high, each one a little different, some capped with flat slabs, some with sharp points sticking out. And they weren't where cairns should be. They were tucked just off the trail, half hidden under branches, like they were meant to be seen only if you were paying too much attention. I passed the first one and thought, weird. Maybe some bored backpackers. But then I saw another, and another, and soon I realized they lined the trail every couple 100 feet, and that prickling on my neck got worse because each one felt like a little warning sign, like don't go further, turn back while you can. But I ignored it, like an idiot, because I didn't want to spook myself out of a perfectly good campsite. By the time I reached the dam, the light was nearly gone. The water on the far side looked black and endless, the granite cliffs rising above it like a fortress, and the air had turned cold enough that I could see my breath. I stopped there, leaning on the railing, trying to shake the feeling. And that's when I noticed something carved into the wood. Not initials or hearts like you usually see, but deep scratches, repeating symbols, almost like triangles stacked inside each other, gouged hard enough to splinter the planks. And I swear the wood around the carvings looked darker, like it had been burned. But without the ash, I told myself I was tired, just reading too much into it. So I crossed the dam and followed the trail along the reservoir, looking for a flat spot. The water was lapping slow and steady against the shore, but the sound was off, like it wasn't syncing with the ripples, like there was a half-second delay between what I saw and what I heard, and it made my stomach twist. Finally, I found a patch of dirt under some pines, far enough from the water to feel safe, but close enough that I could still hear it. I dropped the pack and started setting up the tent, fumbling with the poles, because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself it was just the cold, nothing more. But I knew better. I've camped in the Sierras enough times to know what normal nerves feel like. And this wasn't it. This was like the forest itself didn't want me there. Like it was holding its breath and waiting for me to screw up. I lit the little stove, made some instant noodles, tried to read by headlamp. But the words kept swimming. Every shadow around the tent stretched too far, like the trees were bending toward me. And then I heard it again, that crunch of gravel, but slower this time, deliberate, coming from the direction of the trail. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth, and just listened. It came closer, one step, then another, then stopped. I whispered out, "Hello," felt stupid, waited, Nothing. Just silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Then a faint scrape, like something dragging across stone, and my skin crawled. I zipped the tent shut, climbed inside, tried to convince myself it was just an animal, a deer maybe. But deep down I knew no deer moves like that. No deer stops and waits like that. I lay there for what felt like hours, every muscle tight, eyes wide open in the dark, until finally exhaustion won and I drifted, not into real sleep, but that shallow half-dream where your mind keeps jerking you awake. And in those moments between, I swore I heard whispering outside the tent, low and steady, like someone reciting words too old to understand, words that made the air feel colder with every syllable. And that's where I'll stop this part, because that first night was only the beginning, and what came after makes me wish I had never set foot on that trail, makes me wish I had turned around the second I saw those stacked stones, because everything that followed started right there on that cold October evening, when the forest decided to notice me. When I woke the next morning, it wasn't the sun that pulled me out of sleep, but the sound of water dripping against the tent fabric, steady and unnatural, because it hadn't rained during the night. I knew that instantly. The air was dry, the ground outside was dry, and yet drip by drip something was pattering right above me. I lay still, listening, my heart hammering. Then I slowly unzipped the tent flap and looked up, and what I saw almost made me pack everything and hike straight back out before my boots could even warm up, because hanging from the branch above my campsite was a little bundle of sticks tied together with what looked like strips of cloth, and the cloth was damp, soaked through, and the water was dripping down onto the tent, each drop hitting the fabric like a ticking clock. The bundle was shaped almost like a person, crude arms and legs, a little lump for a head, and the strips of cloth had writing on them, faint, black lines that ran together in the wet. I didn't want to look too close, but I could see enough to know they weren't English, not even letters I recognized, just looping shapes and sharp slashes that made my skin crawl, like my brain wanted to turn them into words but couldn't. Scrambled out of the tent, almost dripping on the flap, and the morning air hit me sharp. The reservoir was still, flat like glass. The pines were whispering just a little in the breeze, and everything looked so ordinary that it almost broke my mind to see that bundle hanging there, like someone had crept through camp while I slept, and left it just to let me know they could. I looked around the trees, scanning every shadow, half expecting to see someone standing there watching. But there was nothing, only the hush of morning and the distant cry of a bird echoing against the granite walls. I pulled the bundle down, maybe stupidly. Maybe I should have left it, but I didn't want it above me. I didn't want it dripping on me anymore, so I yanked it free and tossed it into the brush, wiped my hands on my jeans like I could scrub off the feeling, and told myself I just needed coffee, just needed to wake up. I lit the stove, boiled water, and sat there sipping out of a dented tin mug, while the sun climbed over the ridges. But no matter how much caffeine I gulped down, I couldn't shake the heaviness, like the forest was still pressing against my chest. When I broke camp, I tried to convince myself it was some dumb prank. Maybe that Nevada SUV back at the trailhead belonged to a couple of weird backpackers who thought it would be funny to freak people out. But even telling myself that didn't land, because there was no laughter in that bundle, no playfulness. It was too precise, too intentional, and the cloth was too old, frayed at the edges like it had been handled 100 times before. I told myself to stop spiraling, shouldered the bag, and pushed on along the trail. The trail hugged the water for a while, narrow and rocky, and with every step I felt more eyes on me. It's hard to explain, but sometimes you know when the woods are just woods, and sometimes you know when the woods are awake, alive in a way that notices you. And this was the second kind, the kind where every snapping twig makes you freeze, the kind where you feel like you're being measured, weighed, judged with every breath you take. About an hour in, I came across another one of those stone stacks, only this one was right in the middle of the trail, blocking the way. It was taller than the others, chest high, balanced in a way that seemed impossible. A flat stone perched upright on top like a blade. I stopped dead, staring, because it hadn't been there last night. I would have noticed. It was too obvious, and that meant someone had built it during the night while I slept. Someone who knew exactly where I was and exactly where I'd be walking this morning. My stomach turned over. I considered knocking it down, just kicking it apart, but something in me whispered not to touch it, not to mess with whatever it was marking. So I stepped around, keeping my eyes averted, and kept going. Faster now, boots pounding on the dirt. Midday, the sun was high and the trail began to climb, switchbacking through patches of pine and open granite, sweat dripping down my back, and for a while the movement helped, made me feel almost normal, almost like this was just another hike. But then I started seeing the carvings, not just on the dam, but in the bark of trees along the trail. Those same triangle shapes gouged deep, sometimes stacked one inside the other, sometimes branching out like a web, always low enough that I couldn't miss them, and always fresh, sap still seeping from the wounds. And with each one I passed, I felt the pressure building in my skull, like a headache swelling behind my eyes. By the time the trail leveled out near a stream, I was shaking. I dropped the pack, knelt down to splash water on my face, and that's when I saw something that made me stagger back, because in the mud at the edge of the stream were footprints, not boot prints, not bare feet either, but something in between. Long, narrow impressions with claw, like tips where toes should have been, and they circled the stream like someone or something had been pacing. Round and round, I stared at them too long, trying to make sense of the shape, until I realized the mud was still wet, the prints still crisp, which meant whatever made them had been there very recently. Maybe minutes before I arrived, maybe seconds. I grabbed my bag and kept moving, pushing hard, my throat dry, my chest aching, because the only thing worse than finding tracks like that is standing still near them. I needed distance, needed to get away from that stream, and as I climbed higher, I started to hear it again. Faint at first, almost drowned out by the wind, but it was there. The sound of whispering low and steady, carried on the air like a voice just beyond hearing. Every hair on my arms stood up. I stopped, turned in a circle, scanning the trees, but there was no one, nothing, only that disembodied murmur curling around me. I don't know how long I walked like that, hours maybe, the whispering fading in and out, the trail bending away from the reservoir into thicker forest, the light dimming even though the sun was still up, until finally I reached a little clearing, flat enough to pitch the tent again, but something in me resisted, screamed, not here, not now, but my legs were giving out and I had no choice. I said camp quick, ate a granola bar without tasting it, and crawled into the tent before dark even fully fell, hoping the nylon walls would make me feel safe. But they didn't. Not at all, because almost as soon as the last light drained from the trees, I heard it, right outside, the crunch of footsteps circling the tent, slow and deliberate, like whatever it was wanted me to know it was there. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay frozen while the steps made a full circle, then stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise, because it meant whoever or whatever it was waiting. And when the whispering started again, closer now, clearer now, I realized it was not words in any language I knew, but something older, something that felt like it had been spoken under these pines, long before the trail was ever cut, long before the dam was ever built, something that belonged to the stone and the water and the night, and it wanted me to hear it, and that was the second night, the one that proved this wasn't just nerves or tricks of the mind, because nothing about what I heard could have come from me, nothing about that voice belonged to any human throat, and yet it knew my name. I swear it whispered my name, dragging it slow and low until I thought I'd lose my mind. I didn't sleep much that second night, if you can even call what I did sleeping. It was more like fading in and out of these shallow half-dreams, where every sound outside the tent was amplified until it felt like the fabric wasn't there at all, like I was just lying exposed on the dirt while the forest leaned down close to listen. Every twig snap was a thunderclap in my chest. Every gust of wind was a hand brushing across my face, and underneath all of it I kept hearing that voice, or those voices. It was never clear if it was one whisper or many. Sometimes it sounded male, sometimes female, sometimes both at once, layered together in a way that made my teeth ache. And every time I tried to focus on the words, they slipped away, twisting into sounds that weren't meant for me. But I swear I kept hearing my name, dragged out, long and slow, like the trees themselves were breathing it. At some point near dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The air was colder than it should have been, my breath blooming white in the dim light, and the clearing was heavy with fog, low to the ground, clinging to the grass and the roots. I stood there shivering, scanning the tree line, and that's when I noticed something new. Right there on the edge of the clearing, another stone stack, only this one wasn't like the others. It wasn't neat or balanced. It was broken, toppled, like it had been knocked down in anger. The stones scattered across the dirt, and in the middle of the pile was something pale. I stepped closer, my stomach already twisting, and saw it was bone, small, maybe from a deer, maybe from something else. But it had been carved with those same triangular symbols, the grooves dark and wet, like the cuts had been made fresh during the night. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own back, every instinct in me screaming to get out, to leave everything and just run. But reason tugged at me, telling me I'd never make it back to the trailhead without food or water, telling me that panic was exactly what this thing, whatever it was, wanted from me. So I forced myself to breathe, to back up, to shoulder the weight, even though my hands were shaking so bad I could barely tie the straps. And then I set off, not toward Rancheria Falls anymore, but back the way I'd come, because I wasn't about to spend another night out here, not with bones carved and voices whispering, and footprints that didn't belong to anything I knew. The trail felt different, heading back, smaller somehow, the trees pressing in closer, the light dimmer even though the sun was climbing. I walked fast, pushing hard, but no matter how far I went, the air never lightened, the pressure never lifted, and after maybe 2 hours I realized something that made my blood run cold. The trail wasn't right. The turns weren't where I remembered. The stacks of stones that had marked the path on the way in were gone or moved. The carvings on the trees were in new places, higher up, lower down, repeating in patterns that hadn't been there before. It was like the forest had rearranged itself behind me, reshuffled its pieces, just enough that the map in my head no longer matched what my eyes were seeing. I stopped at one point, tried to check my phone, even though I knew there'd be no service. But when the screen lit up, the clock said something that nearly made me drop it, because it wasn't morning anymore. It wasn't even midday. It said 6:13 in the evening, and there was no way I'd been walking that long. No way time had slipped like that. I stood frozen, watching the numbers tick forward, feeling the cold sweat on my neck, and for a second I swear I heard laughter, soft and close, not mocking exactly, but knowing, like the forest was letting me realize just how small I was inside it. I kept walking, no choice but to keep moving, every bend in the trail pulling me deeper into a place that felt less and less like Yosemite, and more like some mirror of it, a version of the wilderness where the rules didn't hold, where distance and direction bent wrong. The air grew heavier, darker, until even in broad daylight I had to use my headlamp to see the ground in front of me. And that's when I came across the second set of prints, clearer this time, deeper in the mud, longer strides, almost human but not quite. And they weren't just circling or pacing, they were following the trail, always just ahead of me, like whatever made them knew exactly where I was going. At some point, exhaustion broke me, my legs trembling, lungs burning. I stumbled into a hollow where the trees opened just enough to let in a shaft of fading light, and there at the center of the hollow was something that stopped me cold. Another bundle, like the one I'd found dripping above my tent, only this one was bigger, hanging from a branch at least 10 feet off the ground. and I swear it looked like it was breathing, the cloth shifting slow and steady as if something inside was moving. I stood there rooted, heart hammering, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, just a trick. But the air was still, heavy, dead, and that bundle was rising and falling, like lungs pulling air. I backed away, careful, step by step, until my boot snapped a twig, and the sound was like a gunshot in the silence. The bundle jerked, twisted, and a sound came out of it, muffled, like a voice trapped inside, calling low and broken. And that's when I turned and ran, sprinting blind through the trees, branches whipping my face, back bouncing on my shoulders, every step filled with the certainty that if I looked back, I'd see it. I'd see something crawling down out of that bundle and coming after me. When I finally collapsed, it was full dark, my chest heaving, sweat freezing on my skin, and I realized with a sinking horror that I had no idea where I was. No trail, no water, just black trees and dirt, and the sound of my own breath tearing out of me. I sat there shaking, trying to listen for any sign of direction, and that's when I heard it again, faint at first, then stronger, the whispering. But this time it wasn't just outside, it wasn't just in the trees, it was inside my head, curling behind my ears, sinking into my bones, repeating that same rhythm, that same almost language, and under it, beneath it, my name, clear and sharp, spoken over and over until I thought I would break. That's how the third night began, lost in a place that no map could explain, with the voices in my skull and the forest bending itself into shapes I couldn't trust. And I knew then that I wasn't just hiking anymore. I wasn't just lost. I was being led, drawn somewhere I had no business going. And the worst part was, I was starting to feel like I had no choice. I don't remember falling asleep that third night, but I must have drifted at some point, because when I opened my eyes there was light, not morning light, not sunlight, but a pale silver glow like moonlight, except when I looked up through the branches there was no moon. The sky was blank, just black and empty like the stars had been scraped away. But the clearing was lit all the same, soft and cold, enough that I could see the ground around me. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone, because standing at the edge of the hollow were shapes, tall and thin, darker than the trees behind them, their outlines just barely visible against the glow, not moving, not breathing, just watching. My chest seized up, every instinct screaming not to look at them straight on, so I kept my eyes low, pretending to fuss with my back, but I could feel them. I could feel their eyes like heat on my skin, even though the air was freezing. I reached slowly for my headlamp, thinking maybe the beam would scatter them. Maybe light would prove they were just shadows. But when I clicked it on, the bulb flickered once, twice, then died. Brand new batteries, and it just snuffed out like something had swallowed the power. I shook it, hit it, nothing. The hollow was silent, except for the faint crackle of pine needles under my knees, and the sound of blood rushing in my ears. I don't know how long I sat there pretending to be calm, But eventually I heard the whisper again, only this time it wasn't drifting through the air. It was coming from the direction of those shapes, carried from one to the next, like they were passing it between them. A thread of sound weaving through the hollow, building into something almost like a chant, and with every breath of it, the glow around me dimmed. The air thickened, and my head started to pound so hard, I thought my skull might split. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was already inside me, rattling my teeth, scraping my nerves raw. I snapped, grabbed my pack, and bolted, stumbling through the brush with no sense of direction. Just moving, just trying to put distance between me and whatever those things were. Branches tore at my arms, roots caught my boots, and still I ran until my legs gave out. And when I finally collapsed again, I found myself on a trail, narrow and winding, not one I recognized, not the one I'd come in on, but a trail nonetheless, cut into the dirt with just enough definition that I could follow it. I told myself maybe, just maybe, it would lead me back to the reservoir, back to something familiar. I walked, stumbling, dragging my pack like dead weight, the glow fading behind me until the night pressed in, heavy and absolute, the kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face. I trailed my fingers along the tree trunks, just to keep balance, feeling the rough bark under my skin, and every so often I'd feel carvings, shallow grooves, triangular cuts, fresh and sticky with sap, always the same pattern, always that same wrong geometry burned into the living wood. At some point the trail opened up into another clearing, and there, standing in the middle of it, was a signpost, weathered, leaning. The wood split with age, but the words carved into it were sharp, new, too new. They read Rancheria Falls, and underneath that, they read 6 miles. My heart lurched, because that was where I was supposed to be going in the first place. That was where I was supposed to meet my buddy. It felt like salvation, like maybe this nightmare had an exit after all. So I set off, almost running, clutching that hope like a lifeline. But the trail didn't feel right. Every switchback stretched too long. Every straightaway bend when it shouldn't have, and the miles dragged on without changing. I'd walk what felt like an hour, 2 hours, and still every bend revealed the same kind of trees, the same kind of slope. No sign of water, no sound of a waterfall, just more dark, more whispering, and more of those stone stacks, taller now, sharper, some with bones wedged between the rocks, some with feathers stuck like offerings, all of them leaning inward toward the trail, like they were watching me pass. Eventually I stopped, dropped to my knees, and just sat there shaking, whispering out loud to myself, asking the empty air what it wanted from me, and I swear I heard an answer, faint but clear, a voice gurgling through the pines, not outside, not inside, but right in the space between, and it said almost in a sigh, not yet, not yet, like I was being led somewhere specific, like the forest wasn't done with me. I pushed on because what else could I do? My legs were trembling, my throat raw. But I kept walking because stopping felt worse. like standing still would invite something closer, something I couldn't fight. And finally, after what felt like forever, I saw a light ahead, faint, flickering orange against the black. I stumbled toward it, heart hammering, thinking maybe it was another hiker, maybe a campfire, maybe salvation. But when I broke through the trees, I froze, because it wasn't a campfire at all. It was a circle of torches stuck in the ground, burning low and steady, and at the center of the circle was another bundle, huge this time, taller than me, wrapped in layer after layer of cloth, covered in those same looping marks. And it was moving, not just shifting, not just breathing, but writhing, like something inside was struggling to get out. I stood there shaking, every instinct telling me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. My eyes locked on that bundle as the cloth split, just slightly enough for me to see what was underneath. Pale skin stretched too thin, an arm maybe, or something shaped like an arm, straining against the bindings, and from deep inside it came a sound. Not a whisper this time, not words at all, but a low guttural moan that rolled through the clearing and made my bones ache. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root, and that's when I realized the whispering hadn't stopped. It was all around me, behind me, above me. The shapes had followed. They were standing just beyond the circle of torches, their outlines flickering in the firelight, watching, waiting, silent now, except for that endless sound weaving through the trees. And I knew then that I wasn't lost at all. I was exactly where they wanted me, led step by step into the heart of whatever this was. And the worst part was, some part of me felt like I'd been here before, like I'd walked this trail in another life, like I'd stood in this clearing 100 times and forgotten it each time I woke. And now, it was happening again. And maybe this time I wouldn't wake at all. I don't know how long I stood frozen in that torchlit clearing. Maybe seconds, maybe hours. Time had already started losing its grip on me. All I remember is the smell, sharp and acrid like burned pine, mixed with something sweeter and rotting at the same time. It clung to my throat, coated my tongue until I thought I'd gag. The bundle at the center of the torches kept shifting, pulling at its bindings, and each time it moved, the firelight dimmed, shadows stretching out like claws across the dirt, and the shapes at the edge of the clearing swayed with it, like trees bending in wind that wasn't there. I wanted to scream, wanted to charge forward and tear the thing apart, just to see what was inside, but my body locked, my muscles stiff like I was being held in place. And in that silence, I realized the whispering wasn't outside anymore. Not in the trees, not in the torches. It was inside me, not just in my head, but in my chest, vibrating through my ribs, beating in time with my heart, every wordless syllable syncing with my pulse, until I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was in my blood now. Then, without warning, the torches all flared at once, bursting brighter, the flames leaping taller than me, the heat rolling across the clearing, and the bundle shuddered violently, thrashing, the cloth tearing open in long, jagged strips. and I saw more of it. Pale limbs, too many joints bending wrong, fingers like roots groping out into the night. I stumbled back, nearly fell, but something in the circle shifted, like an opening just wide enough for me to slip through. And without thinking, I bolted, sprinting into the trees with branches clawing at my arms, the firelight fading behind me. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs buckled, and when I finally collapsed, I realized I was back on a trail again, or what looked like a trail, dirt packed down, stones set in a line, but it felt wrong, too smooth, too deliberate, like it hadn't been made by boots and hooves and ranger trucks, but carved by something older, something that wanted me to follow. I tried to stop, tried to sit down and refuse, but my legs kept twitching, my feet edging forward, even as I shook my head and muttered, "No," over and over under my breath. Eventually I gave in, not out of choice, but because the pull was too strong. I walked, stumbling, dragging myself along while the trail sloped downward, deeper into a canyon, the air growing colder with every step, my breath frosting white, my fingers numb, even though the night before had been mild, and soon I started hearing water, a steady rush echoing through the granite. At first it gave me hope, made me think I'd found the reservoir again, but when I reached the source, my stomach dropped, because it wasn't water at all, not like I knew it. It was thick, darker than it should have been, glinting in the torchlight that somehow followed me, and it stank like copper and salt, a river of something that had no business running through the Sierras. I gagged, covered my mouth, but the whisper pushed me forward, across a narrow log that served as a bridge, the surface slick under my boots. And as I crossed, I looked down just once, just long enough to see faces, pale and silent, drifting beneath the surface, eyes open, mouths moving in perfect rhythm with the voice in my head, and I nearly lost my balance, nearly toppled into that current, but something shoved me upright, a hand maybe, a force maybe, I don't know, and I stumbled to the far side, shaking so hard I thought my bones would rattle apart. On the other side, the trail climbed again, winding up into thicker forest. And that's when I started seeing them, not shapes this time, not shadows, but figures, clear enough in the moonless glow to make out details, tall and gaunt, skin stretched thin over bones, eyes sunken, but burning faintly like coals. Their mouths never moved, not once, but the whisper kept pouring out of them all the same, echoing in my skull like 1,000 voices layered on top of each other. I tried not to meet their eyes, kept my gaze on the dirt, but every step closer made the pressure worse. My teeth ached, my vision blurred, and I felt like my body was breaking down cell by cell. I don't know how long I wandered like that, surrounded but untouched, herded like cattle through the trees, until finally the trail opened again, and I found myself staring at something that broke me more than anything else so far, because there in the clearing was a structure, not natural, not stone stacks or carved bark, but wood, massive timbers lashed together with rope, forming an arch that towered above the treetops, and nailed into the beams were dozens, maybe hundreds of those bundles, each one different sizes, some small like the one above my tent, some massive like the one in the torch circle, and every single one of them was shifting, writhing, alive, the sound of their muffled voices blending into a low drone that shook the ground. I fell to my knees, covering my head with my arms, begging for it to stop, and for the first time the whisper inside me did stop, just for a moment, enough for silence to hit like a wave, and then a single word rang out, clear and sharp, a word I didn't know but felt in my bones, a word that wasn't English, wasn't anything human, and yet I understood it all the same. It meant stay. It meant belong. It meant this was no longer a hike, no longer a story. This was where I ended and they began. And in that moment, I realized I might never leave this place, not the way I came in, not the way I wanted, because whatever was waiting under those bindings, whatever had been whispering through the pines since my first step off the dam, it didn't want me gone. It wanted me changed. I don't know if I fainted in front of that towering arch or if I just blacked out, because when I opened my eyes again, it was morning, or at least it looked like morning. The clearing was bathed in pale light, and the forest sounded alive again, birds calling, branches creaking, the kind of normal sounds that make you think, maybe you dreamed it all, maybe the night was just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, except the arch was still there, massive and impossible, and the bundles nailed to its beams were swaying gently. Even though there was no wind, I sat up slow, every muscle aching like I'd been beaten. My back was beside me, untouched, and for a second I thought maybe I should just grab it and run. But where would I go? I didn't even know if the trail was real anymore. I didn't know if the canyon or the river or the torch circle had been real. Everything blurred together now. One long, unbroken night that hadn't ended even when the sun came back. I got to my feet, legs trembling, and forced myself to look at the arch, really look at it, and that's when I saw the carvings. The same triangles etched deep into the wood, repeating over and over. But this time I noticed something new. Tiny notches cut into the corners, almost like tally marks, and there were so many, too many to count, like generations had been adding to them for centuries. I backed away, turned, and started down the nearest trail, not caring if it was the right way, not caring if it led out or deeper in. I just needed to move. The forest closed around me, the trees thicker, the light dimmer, and the farther I went, the quieter it got, until even the birds stopped, even the wind stopped, the silence pressing against my ears like water. And then I heard it again, faint at first, then stronger, the whispering, always the whispering. But this time it was different. It wasn't just a voice, it was a rhythm, a pulse, matching the beat of my footsteps, syncing with the swing of my arms, until I realized it wasn't following me. It was controlling me, guiding me step by step. I tried to fight it, stopped dead, planted my boots in the dirt, clenched my fists, but my body twitched forward anyway. one foot dragging, then the other, like I was a puppet on invisible strings. I screamed raw and loud, hoping it would break the hold, but the sound died in my throat, muffled like the air swallowed it before it could echo. I staggered, fell to my knees, dug my fingers into the dirt, and that's when I saw something that almost broke me, because under the layer of pine needles, the soil wasn't soil at all. It was bone, small and brittle, thousands of fragments crushed together, and when I pulled my hand back, the tips of my fingers were bleeding from where the sharp edges had cut me. I scrambled up, wiping my hands on my jeans, the sight of red against blue denim snapping me into focus for a moment, and I realized the forest around me was changing. The trees taller, their bark darker, twisted, the sky overhead dimmer. Even though the sun should have been climbing higher, it felt like I'd stepped sideways into another version of Yosemite, one older, one hungrier. And the trail ahead was no longer dirt, but stone, flat and smooth, carved with those same endless triangles, glowing faintly like embers buried just below the surface. I followed it because I couldn't not, every step sinking me deeper into whatever this was, until finally I heard water again, not rushing this time but crashing, pounding, the unmistakable sound of a waterfall, and my heart leapt. Rancheria Falls it had to be. Maybe this nightmare was finally spitting me back out where I was supposed to be. I pushed forward, faster, half running now, and sure enough, I broke through the trees, and there it was, a waterfall tumbling down jagged granite, mist rising into the air. But it wasn't Rancheria, not the one I knew from maps and pictures. This one was wrong, too tall, too violent, the water black as oil, crashing down into a pool that churned with shapes just beneath the surface. Shapes that looked almost human, but stretched, elongated, their arms reaching up only to be pulled under again and again. I stumbled closer, the roar of it deafening, the mist cold against my face, and then I saw something that made my stomach flip. At the base of the falls, half submerged in the churning pool, was a figure, a man, standing waist deep, his clothes soaked, his head tilted back, his mouth wide open, and from that mouth poured the same whisper I'd been hearing for days, loud now, clear now, rising above the roar of the water. I screamed at him, waved my arms, desperate for him to see me, to acknowledge me, but he never moved, never blinked, just kept whispering with the current. And when I stepped closer, I realized with a jolt that I recognized him, not his face exactly, but his jacket. The same faded green shell my buddy was supposed to be wearing, the one I was supposed to meet out here. I froze, throat dry, heart pounding, because if that was him, if that was really him, then he'd been taken before I even arrived, swallowed into this nightmare like bait for me to follow. I shouted his name, screamed until my voice cracked, but the whisper swallowed it, drowned it out. And then he turned, slow, deliberate, his eyes meeting mine across the churning water, and they weren't his eyes anymore. They burned faint red like coals, and his mouth twisted into a grin That wasn't his grin, and the whispering stopped just long enough for him to speak one word, low and guttural. Come. I staggered back, tripped on the rocks, nearly fell into the pool, but some instinct kept me upright. I turned and ran, back into the trees, the roar of the falls fading behind me, but the words still echoing in my skull. Come, come, come. And I realized with a sick certainty that no matter how far I ran, no matter what trail I followed, I was being pulled toward something, toward an end I couldn't escape, and maybe my buddy had already walked this path. Maybe dozens before him had too, and maybe all of us were just tally marks carved into the corners of those endless triangles. That's how the sixth night began, deeper in the forest than I ever wanted to go, with the sound of my friend's voice twisted into something inhuman, echoing behind me, and the knowledge that whatever waited ahead wasn't just for me. It had been waiting for all of us. I don't even remember sleeping that night. If I slept at all, I only remember walking, just walking through the forest, while the whisper filled every corner of my head, until I couldn't tell if I was still moving under my own power, or if I was being carried along like a leaf in a current. Every time I stumbled, the ground seemed to rise up to meet me. Every time I hesitated, the trees leaned in until their branches brushed my shoulders, guiding me forward. And when I finally came back to myself, the sun was gone. The sky had dimmed into that cold gray that comes just before full dark, and the trail beneath me was no longer dirt, no longer stone. It was wood, wide blanks stretching ahead like some endless boardwalk built through the middle of the wilderness. At first, I thought maybe I'd wandered into a ranger path, something built for maintenance or monitoring the watershed, but the boards were wrong. Old, splintered, wet with something thicker than dew. And when I crouched down to look closer, I realized the wood was bleeding, dark red, seeping from deep cracks, dripping down between the planks, and the smell hit me so hard I gagged. Copper and rot mingled together, the kind of smell that sticks in your throat until you can taste it. I staggered upright, ready to run back. But when I turned, the way I'd come was gone. Just thick black pines pressing shoulder to shoulder. No path between them, no space at all, like the forest had closed behind me. So I went forward, step after step, the boards creaking under my boots, the sound echoing into the trees. And soon I realized I wasn't alone. There were figures on either side of the path, half hidden in the shadows, tall and thin, their faces pale in the dim light, some of them wearing clothes that looked almost familiar. Hiking jackets, faded jeans, boots caked in mud, others draped in cloth that was too old, too heavy, stitched with patterns of triangles repeating endlessly across their shoulders. They didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there with their heads tilted slightly toward me, eyes hollow, watching. And each time I glanced away, more of them seemed to appear, lining the trail in silence like an honor guard at a funeral. The whisper kept threading through my chest, stronger now, steady like a drum beat. And after a while I noticed the figures were swaying in time with it, Side to side, their movements slow, deliberate, like trees shifting in a storm. But there was no storm. The air was still, heavy, pressing down on me until sweat rolled down my spine. Even though the night was cold, I tried humming to myself, some tune I didn't even recognize, just something to drown it out. But the whisper swallowed it, twisting my voice back into its rhythm, bending it until I was humming their song without meaning to. The boardwalk stretched on and on, until finally the trees opened, and I found myself staring at a lake. Not the reservoir I'd come for, not Hetch Hetchy's calm expanse. This was smaller, rounder, cupped deep in granite walls, the surface perfectly still, reflecting the sky like glass, except the reflection was wrong, not matching the stars above. Instead it showed shapes, countless shapes moving beneath, limbs bending at impossible angles, faces pressed against the underside of the water, like it was glass, their mouths opening and closing in perfect sync with the whisper in my chest. I wanted to run, to turn away, but my feet carried me forward onto a dock that stretched out over the lake, its planks damp and slick, the same bleeding wood as the trail behind me. I walked to the end, my breath shallow, my chest tight, and when I looked down into the water, I saw myself, not the way I should look, but twisted, eyes dark, mouth moving with the rest of them, whispering along, and the side of it snapped something in me. I shouted no, slammed my boot down against the boards, hard enough to send vibrations into the lake, and for a moment, the surface broke, ripples spreading out, the reflection shattering, and everything went silent. No whisper, no voices, no sound at all, just silence so deep I thought my heart had stopped. Then the dock lurched beneath me, tilting, and I realized something huge was moving in the water below, something rising, the surface swelling upward as though the lake itself was lifting to meet me, and I backed away, stumbling, arms flailing for balance, but the boards only carried me forward, tilting me closer, until the water finally broke and something emerged, not a body, not a creature, but a shape, an opening, a triangle formed of water and shadow, rising out of the lake like a doorway, its edges sharp and glistening, and inside it I saw a place that wasn't the forest anymore, wasn't Yosemite, wasn't anywhere on Earth I'd ever seen. It looked like endless corridors carved into stone, walls slick with moisture, lit by torches that burned with that same unnatural light, and moving through those corridors were figures bound in cloth, writhing, shifting, their whispers echoing through the doorway into my chest, until my ribs felt like they'd crack. I staggered back, shaking my head, muttering over and over that it wasn't real, that none of this was real. But the dock tilted again, throwing me forward, and before I could stop myself, I fell to my knees at the edge, staring into the doorway, staring into that impossible place. And then I heard it again, the voice that wasn't mine, the voice that wore my friend's face at the waterfall, low and steady, come. And this time I almost did. I almost crawled forward into that black triangle of water and shadow, my hands gripping the my body shaking with the pull of it. Only some last shred of instinct held me back. The tiniest thread of resistance. I bit down on my own tongue until blood filled my mouth, sharp and metallic, and the pain was enough to snap me out of it, just for a heartbeat, enough to shove myself backward, scrambling across the dock until I hit the dirt, gasping, coughing, blood dripping down my chin. The triangle shuddered, wavered, and then sank back into the water, the surface going still again, the whispers fading, but not gone, never gone, always humming low in the back of my skull. I sat there shaking, staring at my reflection in the water's edge, and this time when I saw myself, I noticed something new. Faint lines etched into the skin under my eyes, little notches like tally marks carved deep. And I knew then that I wasn't escaping. Not really, because whatever this was, it had already marked me, already counted me among its own. So I pushed to my feet, wiped the blood from my mouth, and staggered back into the trees. The dock behind me vanishing as though it had never been there. The lake swallowed in darkness, and the trail ahead glowing faintly with those endless triangles, calling me deeper, always deeper, into whatever waited next. I don't remember how long I walked after leaving that lake. Time had already stretched and folded so many times that the idea of hours or minutes felt useless. All I know is the trail beneath my boots kept changing. First dirt, then stone, then wood, and now something else entirely. Smooth and cold, like polished bone. The faint glow of the triangles etched into it, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower, and the forest around me grew stranger with every step. The trees no longer pines or cedars, but black spires that seemed to bend inward, their bark slick and glistening as though they were sweating, and the air was heavy, thick, every breath dragging through my lungs like syrup. I tried not to look at the spires, but it was impossible. They loomed so close together that the path felt like a tunnel, and sometimes I swore I saw faces pressed into their bark, eyes closed, mouths moving faintly, whispering along with the rhythm in my chest. I clenched my fists, muttered out loud to myself that it wasn't real, that I was hallucinating, but the sound of my own voice came out thin and broken, swallowed almost instantly, and in the silence afterward I realized there was something new. A faint hum beneath the whisper, low and steady like the sound of machinery buried deep underground. The path sloped downward, the glow brightening, until finally I broke through the spires into another clearing, and what I saw there stopped me cold, because it wasn't forest anymore, not even close. It was a chamber, massive and circular, walls carved straight into the granite like some impossible cathedral, the ceiling lost in shadow, and at the center of the chamber was a pit, perfectly round, its edges lined with torches that burned without smoke, their light flickering across carvings etched into the walls. Endless rows of triangles stacked one on top of the other, each corner marked with those same tally cuts, so many that the stone itself seemed more notch than surface. I crept forward, boots scuffing against the smooth bone-like floor, and when I reached the edge of the pit, I felt the heat rise from it. Not like fire, not dry, but wet and heavy. The heat of breath, of lungs exhaling. And when I peered over the edge, I saw movement not far below, shifting, writhing, like thousands of bodies tangled together, their limbs weaving into one another, until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began, their mouths all opening in perfect unison, whispering up toward me in a language that wasn't a language at all, but still lodged itself in my head like splinters. I staggered back, hand clamped over my mouth, but the pull was too strong. I couldn't leave, not yet. Something held me there. Something wanted me to look longer, and so I did. Against every instinct I had left, I leaned forward and stared into the pit, and slowly, beneath the tide of writhing limbs, I saw something else. Something vast. A shape too large to comprehend, pressed just beneath the surface like a giant, curled in sleep, its form marked with endless triangles glowing faintly, its presence so heavy that my knees buckled, my chest heaved, and I dropped to the floor, gasping like I was drowning. That was when the figures appeared again, the tall, thin shapes that had been lining the trail, but now they stepped into the chamber, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, circling the pit in silence, their eyes faintly burning, their mouths still closed, but the whisper pouring from them all the same, louder now, sharper, vibrating through the stone, through my teeth, until I thought they might shatter. And then one of them broke from the circle, stepped toward me, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. Pale skin stretched thin, lips cracked, and eyes so deep they looked bottomless. And in those eyes I saw my own reflection, twisted, hollow, already becoming like them. It reached out a hand, long fingers tipped with nails like splinters, and pressed it against my chest, right over my heart, and the whisper spiked so loud I screamed, the sound torn out of me echoing off the chamber walls. And in that scream, I felt something leave me, torn out, like breath, like bone, ripped free and swallowed into the pit. And when it was over, I collapsed to the floor, trembling, gasping, unable to move, my chest aching as though part of me was missing. The figure stepped back into the circle, and the whisper softened again, low, steady, rhythmic, and in that rhythm, I heard words for the first time, not English, not anything human, but words all the same, and though I couldn't understand them, I felt their meaning deep in my gut, promises of belonging, of permanence, of being counted among them, a tally mark carved into stone, a body added to the endless pit. And I knew then that this was the heart of it, the thing the triangles had been pointing toward since the beginning, the thing that had been waiting beneath Yosemite long before the dam, long before trails or maps, something that wanted nothing more than to pull the living down into its endless body. I crawled backward, dragging myself along the smooth floor, shaking my head, muttering no over and over, but the whisper only grew softer, sweeter, like a lullaby, and the figures began to sway, their movements hypnotic, side to side, side to side, and I felt my own body swaying with them, my head nodding, my eyelids heavy, like sleep was the only option, like giving in was the only option. I bit down on my tongue again, hard, the copper taste of blood filling my mouth. But even that didn't fully break me free this time. I was slipping, losing myself, inch by inch, and then I felt something strange, something sharp in my palm. I looked down and realized I was still holding a shard of wood, broken from one of the bleeding planks of the dock. I don't remember picking it up, don't remember carrying it this far, but it was there, sticky and dark. And as soon as I saw it, the whisper faltered, just for a breath, just enough for me to drag myself to my feet, clutching the shard like a weapon. Though I knew it was useless, I raised it anyway, screaming, daring them to come closer. But none of them moved. They just stood in that endless circle, swaying, whispering, their eyes burning into me. Backed toward the edge of the chamber, my whole body shaking, the shard clenched tight enough to cut my palm, and when my back hit the stone wall, I slid along it, inch by inch, until I found an opening, a narrow passage leading out, and without thinking, I bolted, sprinting down it, the whisper echoing after me, the sound of countless mouths, moving in perfect rhythm, chasing me deeper into the mountain, deeper into whatever this place really was. And as I ran, I realized something terrifying, something that made my stomach twist, the notches under my eyes, the tally marks etched into my skin. They were burning now, hot like brands. And each time the whisper rose louder, another line carved itself deeper, as if the forest wasn't just counting me. It was finishing me, turning me into something that would never leave. The passage tightened as I ran, walls pressing close, damp stones scraping my shoulders, the air thick and heavy like I was breathing through cloth, every step carrying me deeper, my boots slipping on wet rock, my hand clutching that bleeding shard until the edges dug into my palm. The whisper followed, softer now, more distant but never gone, always thrumming like a second heartbeat. And after what felt like hours, the tunnel opened again, spilling me into another chamber, this one narrower, longer, lined with alcoves on either side, and in each alcove hung a bundle bound in cloth, dozens of them, swaying gently as if stirred by breath I couldn't feel. I froze, chest heaving, eyes darting from one to the next, because I knew what was inside them now. I had seen the limbs tearing through, seen the roots of fingers clawing at the air, and as I stared, I swore I could hear them shifting, muffled cries rising faintly beneath the cloth. Not loud, not desperate, but rhythmic, all in time with the whisper that never left my chest. I staggered forward, muttering that they weren't real, that this was all some nightmare. But the alcoves went on and on, bundle after bundle, until I realized the chamber was a corridor, an endless hall of the bound, and every one of them was swaying in unison as I passed. I tried not to look at their faces, but my eyes betrayed me, and once, just once, I saw a scrap of fabric slip, a pale cheek revealed, an eyelid fluttering, and in that instant I recognized the face. It was mine, my own reflection bound tight, whispering along with the others, and the sight of it sent me stumbling, gagging, the shard slipping from my grip, clattering against the floor. I snatched it up again with trembling hands, clutching it like a lifeline, because if I dropped it for good, I knew I'd never come back. The corridor narrowed, the alcoves pressing tighter, and soon the bundles brushed my shoulders as I pushed through, their cloth cold and damp against my skin, and each touch sent a shiver through me, like static, like something passing from them into me, and I felt the tally marks burning hotter under my eyes, the skin splitting, trickles of blood running down my cheeks, and I knew I was almost gone, almost counted fully. I bit down on the inside of my mouth, the copper taste grounding me, but it was fading fast, the pull too strong. Finally, the corridor widened into another chamber, this one vast and echoing, its ceiling lost in darkness, and at the center stood a staircase, spiraling downward into blackness, the steps carved from the same bone-smooth stone, triangles etched into every riser, glowing faintly, pulsing with that endless rhythm. I hesitated, my legs trembling, whispering no over and over, but my body moved anyway, one step down, then another, each descent pulling me deeper, the whisper growing louder until it drowned out even my thoughts, until it became the only sound, the only truth. The stairs went on forever, or maybe no time at all, my mind unraveling with every turn, until finally I reached the bottom, a vast platform stretching out over an abyss. And there, at the far end, was something that froze me in place. It was another arch, larger than the one I'd seen in the forest, towering, carved from black stone, its surface crawling with tally marks so deep they looked like wounds, and nailed into its beams were hundreds of bundles, their forms writhing, their whispers rising into a deafening chorus that shook the ground. And at the center of the arch was not a doorway of wood or water, but of shadow itself, a triangle of pure black that swallowed the torchlight around it, deeper than night, deeper than anything. I staggered closer, the shard trembling in my hand, my breath ragged, and with each step, the tally marks under my eyes burned hotter, until I screamed, dropping to my knees, clawing at my face, blood running down my chin, and in that agony I heard the voice again, the same voice that had warned my friend's face at the waterfall, low and commanding. Come, and this time it wasn't just in my head. It filled the chamber, rattling the stones, shaking the air, and from the shadow doorway something shifted, something vast pressing against the surface like it wanted out, like it had been waiting all this time for me to step through and free it. I tried to crawl backward, but the floor tilted, dragging me forward, and behind me the whispering figures filled the chamber, lining the platform, their eyes burning, their bodies swaying in rhythm. And I realized this was it. This was the end of the trail, the place every triangle had been pointing toward, the tally of every soul carved into stone, the mouth of whatever slept beneath Yosemite, waiting to swallow me whole. The shadow pulsed, the doorway widening, and for a heartbeat, I saw what lay beyond, corridors stretching into infinity, walls of flesh and bone twisted together, rivers of black liquid carrying bodies that whispered as they drifted, a sky not of stars, but of eyes, endless eyes opening and closing in time, with the beat in my chest, and at the center of it all, vast and coiled, was the shape I'd glimpsed in the pit, awake now, its gaze fixed on me, its voice filling me. Come, come, come. I raised the shard, screamed with everything I had left, and plunged it into my arm. The pain sharp, real, mine, and for a moment, the whisper faltered, just long enough for me to lurch sideways, slamming into one of the torches, knocking it from its stand, the flame sputtering as it struck the ground, and in that instant the figures recoiled, just slightly, their whispers breaking, the doorway flickering like water disturbed, and I knew I had seconds, maybe less, before it pulled me in for good. So I staggered to my feet, blood pouring from my arm, torch in one hand, shard in the other, and turned back toward the staircase, screaming as I ran, the chorus rising behind me, the shadow pulsing, the ground shaking, every step threatening to throw me into the abyss. But I kept going, because somewhere deep inside, beneath all the tally marks and whispers, some part of me still wanted to live, still wanted to get out, even if it meant carrying this nightmare with me forever. And as I ran up those endless stairs, the voice followed, not soft this time, not sweet but furious, echoing in every corner of my skull. You are already counted, you are already ours. I don't know how long I climbed those stairs, my legs shaking, blood dripping from the wound in my arm, the torch sputtering in my hand, the shard slick and heavy in the other, the whisper rising and falling around me like waves, sometimes soft enough that I almost thought I'd outrun it, sometimes so loud that the stone itself seemed to hum. I stumbled, crawled, forced myself upright, driven by nothing but raw survival. And finally the stairs ended, spilling me back into the corridor of alcoves where the bundles swayed. But something was different now. They weren't just whispering, they were screaming, their muffled voices rising into one long wail that vibrated through my bones. I ran, half blind, shoving past them, their cloth brushing my face, my arms, leaving streaks of moisture across my skin. And I realized with horror that the tally marks under my eyes weren't burning anymore. They were splitting, tearing open, lines of fire carved into my flesh, and each scream from the bundles made the cuts deeper, carving me piece by piece, marking me as one of them. I staggered, slammed against the wall, slid down, gasping, and for a heartbeat, I thought about letting it happen, thought about just lying there and becoming another swaying figure in the endless corridor. But then I heard another sound, faint at first, almost lost beneath the screams. A voice, my friend's voice, not twisted this time, not burned through with that inhuman whisper, but clear, desperate, calling my name. I lurched to my feet, turned toward the sound, deeper in the corridor, and I followed it, stumbling, bleeding, the torchlight flickering across the endless bundles, until I reached one alcove where the cloth was torn, frayed, and through the gap I saw a face. His face pale and streaked with tears, his mouth opening and closing, whispering weakly. And when he saw me, he stopped, his eyes widening, and he mouthed the words, "Help me." I dropped the torch, grabbed at the bindings, tearing at them with the shard, ripping the cloth apart, my hands slick with blood that might have been his or mine. And as I worked, the whisper faltered again, the chorus behind me stuttering, breaking rhythm. But the deeper I cut, the louder the chamber shook, the walls groaning, dust falling from the ceiling. And I knew I was tearing something I wasn't supposed to, unraveling part of the tally itself. I didn't care. I screamed his name, pulled harder, and finally the cloth gave way, spilling him out into my arms, weak, trembling, his skin burning with tally marks of his own, carved deep into his cheeks, his arms, his chest, but alive, breathing, eyes clear. I hauled him up, slung his arm over my shoulders, and together we stumbled forward, away from the alcoves, away from the pit, away from the shadow arch below, the torch guttering behind us until it went out completely. The corridor narrowed, pressing us together, and soon the smooth stone gave way to dirt again, roots jutting from the ceiling. The smell of pine and earth hitting my nose so hard, I almost wept. We pushed faster, half dragging, half crawling, until finally a glow appeared ahead, faint but real, not the pulsing of triangles, but the thin gray of dawn. We burst through the last gap and collapsed onto soil, real soil, cold and damp beneath our hands, the forest rising around us, the Hetch Hetchy trailhead sign, looming crooked and broken a few yards away, as if we'd never left, as if the night had been a dream. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't, because the tally marks still burned under my eyes, because my arm still bled where I'd stabbed it, because when I turned to look at my friend, his skin was etched with lines that hadn't been there before, and because even in the silence of the morning, even with birds calling faintly in the trees, I could still hear the whisper, low and steady, humming in the back of my skull. You are already counted. You are already ours. We staggered to my truck, keys shaking in my bloody hand, the engine turning over with a sound that felt alien after the silence of the underground. We drove down the winding road away from the dam, away from the reservoir, the forest falling behind us. But no matter how far we went, the whisper never faded. It stayed with us, in the rhythm of the tires on the pavement, in the beat of the wipers clearing the windshield, in the pulse of blood in my ears. And when I glanced at my friend in the passenger seat, he was staring straight ahead, lips moving faintly, whispering along in perfect time. It's been months now since that night. Months since I swore I'd never set foot in Yosemite again. But the tally marks haven't faded. They've deepened, carved into me like scars. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear I see them moving, shifting, making space for more. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I dream of the pit, of the bundles, of the shadow arch, and I wake up with dirt under my nails, and the taste of copper in my mouth. And when I check the clock, it's always the same time, 6:17, the time I first set foot at the trailhead, the time I was first counted. I don't hike anymore. I don't camp anymore. I barely leave the house at night, but it doesn't matter because the whisper follows. It's in the creak of floorboards, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the static of the television, and sometimes when I turn a corner in my own home, I catch a glimpse of them. Tall figures swaying in the shadows, eyes burning faintly, waiting for me to join them, and I know it's only a matter of time. Because you can't outrun a tally. You can't erase a mark once it's carved. You can only wait for the count to be finished. And the worst part is this. I'm not writing this to warn you. I'm not writing this to confess. I'm writing this because the whisper told me to. Because every word I type, every triangle I draw in the margins, every line I cut into the corners of paper, it all adds to the count. And if you're reading this now, then you've heard it too. Faint maybe, soft maybe, but it's there. And once you've heard it, you're already counted. You're already ours.